Welcome, everybody. My name is Darren Calhoun. My pronouns are he, him, and I serve on the board of Q Christian Fellowship, where I also help lead our equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. This monthly gathering is a part of how we live into our values by creating intentional space to reflect, learn, and grow together. Whether this is your first time joining us or you're regular in the space, we're so glad that you're here. Each month, we hold conversations that explore what it means to belong, bringing in voices from within our community and beyond. We talk about the ways our identities, experiences, and faith intersect, and how we can be more inclusive and affirming of one another in every area of life. Tonight, we're exploring the rich and often overlooked topic: what does it mean to be both openly polyamorous and a person of faith? How do queerness and polyamory show up in our spiritual lives? And what can we learn from those living out love beyond traditional relationship norms? This session will include a presentation, personal stories, and some shared conversations, and time for Q&A. Whether you're polyamorous, polycurious, or just open to deepening your understanding, this is a space that is for open-hearted dialogue about faith, love, and community. Tonight, our special guest is the Right Reverend Gordon Barclaw, pronouns he, him, a longtime advocate for queer spirituality. Gordon brings decades of ministry and personal experience navigating ethical non-monogamy within a vibrant spiritual life. We're honored to have him and all of you here. So, again, tonight, let's lean in, listen deeply, practice curiosity. Maybe give yourself a second to pause where you feel judgment or where you feel maybe anxiousness, and lean into the beauty of what God is doing all over creation. Don't forget, everything here is an opportunity for you to experience the faith or the ideals of others. This isn't a space where you have to agree or where you have to believe the same things, but we're all here in this big tent environment, gathered together so that we can be one body in Christ. So let's do it. With that being said, again, I already introduced my name is Darren, he, him. And Carrie, would you like to introduce yourself real quick? And then we'll go to Gordon.
Sure. Yep. My name is Carrie. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm currently serve with Darren and a whole bunch of other people on the board of directors with QCF. I think that's all you need to know about me. Gordon, is there anything you'd like to add as we get started?
Well, just that my name is Gordon and my pronouns are he, him. And yeah, I've been actively poly for decades. And I'm also a bishop in the American Old Catholic Church. And I love QCF. I've been going for quite some time.
All right, so understanding polyamory. Polyamory comes from the Greek, meaning many, and Latin meaning love. So it's a kind of a hybrid of two different spaces in history. And the idea here is that this is describing types of relationships that are not casual encounters. It's not just kind of being out on the playing field, but it's about deep relationship, the way that we think about monogamous spaces as deep relationships. But having those and maintaining those multiple loving relationships simultaneously. And that it's consent driven, that it's not an environment where there's a sneaking around or there's a hiding or there's a moving behind each other's backs or without knowledge, but that the space that's created is, and this can be to varying degrees, that it's with consent and knowledge, and it's based in conversation and trust. And so the last part of that, where it talks about deep emotional bonds, where folks are involved in each other's lives multidimensionally, I think is really important here. That we're talking about relationships that are as deep or equally important as any of the relationships that we're traditionally taught of as like the kind of deepest types of romantic relationships in one-on-one relationships. So that's the kind of basic definition, and we are going to nuance tonight. So we're going to be presenting and then telling stories and nuancing and presenting and kind of in that cycle. And then there's a little note here, and most of our slides have a little note. There's a little note here that part of polyamory is finding joy in the joy of our loved ones. So one word for that is compersion. And the idea here is that it's not often when we think about how can people be in multiple loving relationships in romantic perspectives or in deep ways with each other, there's a fear response or a jealousy response or an envy response or some kind of lack or scarcity response. And we want to highlight the other side of that, that in order for this to work well, there needs to be a deep trust and a deep connection around the way in which joy emerges in the complexity of these relationships. So the word that we're offering here is compersion, that feeling of joy, seeing your partner with potential other partners or with other partners.
I love compersion. It's such a wonderful concept. And now we'll talk a little bit about the structures. Again, not exhaustive, but just to give us some grounding ideas. So consensual non-monogamy, maybe if you've heard of a similar term, you might have heard ethical non-monogamy. This is a more updated term that makes it more about what it's about rather than rather than ethical or trying to put a value judgment. Consensual non-monogamy is a relationship structure where uh, all partners consent to non-exclusivity. So again, this isn't cheating. This isn't sneaking around. This is a space where everyone's an informed party or informed have informed consent to how this relationship is working. It's important to talk about it with each partner and to understand each partner's values. Open relationships. Partners maintain primary connection while pursuing outside relationships. This is what many people are more familiar with, especially if when you think of people who maybe come from a traditional marriage and decide to open up their relationship in different ways. And this, we'll talk a little bit more about hierarchy later, but this can sometimes open relationships have a hierarchical pattern to them. Then we have mixed structure relationships, relationships where partners practice different relationship styles. Mixed structure relationships where you, for example, have one partner who is monogamous to their non-monogamous partner. And again, in a consensual polyamory situation, this is something where this is what monogamy works for one person and being open works for a different person, and everyone's agreed. Excuse me, everyone's agreed that that's something that works for them. Also important to remember that any relationship is an ongoing conversation. So people don't typically declare one thing and it's just that one thing forever and ever and ever. But there's always a conversation to see what's important for folks and how they work. Each structure requires clear communication, established boundaries, and ongoing consent. Many people may explore different structures throughout their lives.
Let's spend some time nuancing this. Gordon, do you want to share anything about your experiences with these?
Definitely. Um, when my original primary partner and myself started out, we were in basically a mixed structure where one was monogamous, but agreed to the other one being consensual, non-monogamous. And so we worked through that, and then we thought we were opening into open relationship. So maintaining the primary connection, pursuing outside relationships. And we thought at one point that we actually had gone to consensual non-monogamy. So just like everybody is openly negotiated boundaries, things like that. And what we found out was that A, it is very fluid, and B, when we thought that we were actually being the open relationships, the consensual non-monogamy, we wound up in a relationship that had to end, and it really came back down to the primary relationship was the more important part of it, even though we thought, oh, everybody's equal. And that was quite a realization for us, and kind of informed us as to how we proceeded further after that.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, as a way to get us more into our personal stories, if you could share what it was like when you um, realized that something other than the maybe the traditional mainstream ideals of monogamy weren't for you in your relationship.
Oh, yeah. That's where the open and honest communication really comes down to it, because you really, really, I cannot stress that you need to talk. You need to sit down with each other. You need to find out how you're feeling about things, and there's all of the whys, and well, how are you going to do this, and things like that. And so it really is important that when we actually started out, Dennis and I, he was like, well, that isn't necessarily for me, but okay, and here's some things. Right, it's like, okay, don't bring him home to my bed. Things like that. Practice safe sex, obviously. you know and so we grew into that, and then we got to a point where we both realized that we wanted to share our love, not just with each other, but with other folks, and that the heteronormative monogamy just wasn't really quite for us. And so
Yeah.
it became, through conversations, through actually spending time with each other, and often uh, the people that I was seeing, he knew. And so it wasn't just, like some anonymous person out there. It was definitely friends and acquaintances. And like we said, it's not just like, a three-way for an evening, or, something that just happens on a road trip or something like that. But we're talking about actual relationships, something that's more in depth, something that's more about love.
Cool.
Thank you.
Ready to move forward?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
as we move into the next slide, the idea of relationship structures and philosophies, I think Gordon actually just gave us an illustration of this in talking about being with one other person and then being in a trio, and then kind of what are the realizations that happen when people break up with each other, and how does that shift the relationship. So let's do this slide, but then maybe there's some room to kind of nuance that even a little bit more.
Relationship structures and philosophies. So we mentioned earlier about hierarchical relationships. Hierarchy is just basically where there's a higher level and lower levels, but after that. Hierarchical relationships are partners where certain relationships are prioritized above others and given additional power in rule setting. Often emerges when people with existing partnerships discover polyamory. So this might be some of the ways I hear this being talked about right now are if someone has veto power in the relationship dynamic, or if someone, or if, for example, the there might be a primary relationship where other relationships don't have the same impact or the same level of influence in the relationship. Um, there are people who have different values when it comes to hierarchical versus non-hierarchical, but we'll get into that in a second. Non-hierarchical relationships striving for equal autonomy rather than prioritizing one over another. They involve all network members in discussions of rule changes and limit prioritization where possible. Um, and so again, this is something that can feel very countercultural if we've grown up in traditional environments. But it is a another way of looking at how do we honor each person in the relationship. And a lot of people who practice non-hierarchical relationships kind of use the language of not making anyone disposable, or making sure that everyone's humanity and autonomy are honored in the dynamics that you have. Um, and then lastly, and this is a fun one, Relationship anarchy, a radical egalitarian philosophy applying anarchist principles to relationships. Every connection is given equal consideration, with relationships designed by the people in them, not by societal expectations. That is a mouthful. And what does that mean? This is one that I that I first heard about probably in the last. I'm about to date myself, probably in the last 4 or 5 years. And when I heard about it, it made a lot of sense to me. And so I'll describe it from my own experience. A lot of times when people are dating or when they get married, there's this kind of expectation that every other relationship becomes secondary or even falls away. And that includes family, friendships, just everything kind of gets reoriented around that primary relationship. Relationship anarchy, for me, has been this idea that we don't necessarily need to treat the new relationships that start as automatically more important or displacing other relationships. So, relationship anarchy is this opportunity for us to kind of re strategize and believe and live into this ideal of my family relationships still matter, my friendships still matter. And like if in a dating situation or as I build with someone new, those other relationships don't suddenly get downgraded, but instead these are all a part of my relational network. And so for me, when I first started dating the person that I'm dating now, um, we were just describing the ways we're frustrated with how friends would sometimes go away or disappear when they'd be in a relationship.
Mhm.
And we just started talking about how that was just never, it never made sense for us, right? It's not about, yeah, for some people that is they said, honor thy, cleave, leave and cleave, right? Leave your, leave your mother and father and cleave to your wife or your spouse. And I'm not saying that this is against the biblical principle. What I am saying is that I think there are different ways that we can apply how we lean into our relationships. And for me and my partner, it was, yeah, no, like you're important to me, but that doesn't mean no one else matters now. Or that doesn't mean that the relationships that have been sustaining and critical for you your whole life suddenly get put on a back burner because it's like, oh, well, this is your partner. um, I've been talking a lot. What other thoughts are happening?
We get all this pressure about, oh, well, you have to prioritize. And I think what you're talking about in the anarchy is something that's more holistic and healthy because it isn't prioritizing, it's seeing the beauty in each person and in a real and loving way, not just giving, lip service to it. The hierarchical relationship, as it's shown on here, is indeed where you have a primary and it goes further from there, and you'll always go back to that primary. And the non-hierarchical is, as I said before, we thought we were being non-hierarchical and wound up going back to our original relationship when we broke up with someone, instead of saying, well, hey, what can we do to resolve this a little bit better? Just being honest. And so it is another way of just opening up and being freer to express that love, which in some instances, it's not always sexual. You have relationships with folks that are very, very close, and they're part of your family, your chosen family. And one partner or multiple partners may be sexual with them, but someone else is not, and that doesn't mean that it's any less. So,
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that that's where the concepts around relational anarchy, I think can really start to bridge that space between folks who um, are sexual and folks who are not sexual. And so thinking about the ways in which all of the relationships that we have kind of fit into a constellation or a schema or a pattern. And when new relationships are happening, or when relationships that society says are meant to be more important, right? So depending on what culture you're in and what society you're in, you might hear family first. And that could be something that's really important to you. Not something that I'm saying, okay, so society says this and you need to throw it away, but it could be that you've got a value that family comes first. Well, when you get together with someone, when you're in partnership with people, you're deciding who family is, but that doesn't mean you leave the family that's been with you forever, right? That family comes along into the relationship. And in other cultures where independence is not as prevalent or pushed by society at large, you might get partnered and be living with somebody's blood family, or you might get partnered to be living in a collective in some way. And then in other cultures, it's not like that at all. And it's very much about separate spaces and separate lives, and the intersections happen outside of a home or outside of a family space. So really thinking about what do we learn, or what can we learn from um, our ace and arrow brethren and siblings, and how does that kind of come in and inform the way that all of us do relationships? There's I think reasons why we have terms like work spouse or work wife, or one of those things, right? Like the ways that we depend on each other in a work environment very much parallels the way that people depend on each other in these other intimate family relationships. There's reasons why we describe these kind of scales of emotional intimacy, and the relationships that come out of them in all parts of our lives. And so relationship anarchy is sort of newish language in the last 10 or 15 years, but it's describing the ways in which humans have operated together for all of humanity. And then we fit into these other structural hierarchies, kind of from that grounding place, from that open kind of first level space. So this is a way to kind of get back to some of these philosophies that have emerged in the last, or been described in this particular way in the last century.
And one of
Absolutely.
the things I wanted to point out was in some reading that I had been doing, it's really interesting how monogamy came to be in Western society. And that, in the 18th century, this whole idea of romantic love came up. And then, so then they were deciding, oh, we have to have just one person. And it puts a lot of pressure on that relationship, because what before had been done by a village, you know, supporting and helping to feed and helping to care for people and just being loving with each other and a whole community, all of a sudden comes down to, oh my gosh, I've got to be this everything for one person. I
Hmm.
can't do that. You know, I, I I'm only me, and I don't have those skills, or I don't have this type of insight and things of that nature. And when you are in deep relationships with other people, it actually spreads that out and takes some of that pressure off and kind of enhances the whole experience also.
Exactly. And I think that Um, one, thanks for mentioning Ace and Arrow, folks. Carrie, for again, the chat is going wild. Ace is asexual, Arrow is aromantic, and the fact that all of these values are very useful for people who are monogamous, for people who are heterosexual, for people who are aromantic or asexual, like how we connect to each other. Some people even call this our relationship orientation, is something that we all have in one way or another. But the ways that we get handed a script or handed a story in our society means that most of us haven't spent a lot of time thinking intentionally about what's important for us as opposed to what's quote unquote normal or considered the mainstream. Um, yeah. Let's go a little deeper with another slide. Because again, like when we start to name what's important to us, when we start to name things that are beyond what may be considered the atomic family structure, being two spouses and children, and that core thing, which historically is actually really new in history. Families were considered much bigger and much more extended, what we call extended family now, um, or even just the ways that people live in communities. Our modern society is been very isolated and insular, but there's a much larger and richer history of people existing in ways that both professionally and personally have much longer roots, deeper roots, bigger connections. So here are a few terms and a few structures, and then we'll talk more about those. Uh, Chosen family. Many of you have heard this term, and this can be romantic or non-romantic. These are just the people that you choose to do life with, to grow old with, to make commitments with. I have a few friends who are in intentional living communities. I have friends who do things like deciding to raise children together, and they're not romantically involved. I have friends who have taken someone in as a part of their lifelong family, somebody that is celibate, and they have been effectively included in the parenting and child rearing roles of the family, in the house buying, all those things. They're a full, active leadership member part of the family. Polyfamily, a group of polyamorous people who consider each other to be family. So these are kind of two different sides of the same coin, but polyfamily might be a little bit more specific to when you are in that relationship structure or dynamic. Um, Kitchen table polyamory. This you'll hear a lot about this on Instagram. This is a style that prioritizes the integration of multiple romantic relationships into one life group with close relationships between metamors, strongly encouraged. Another key term here, metamor. So a person that is your person's person. So if if you're not dating someone, but your partner is dating someone else, you and that someone else are metamors. So you're not in a relationship together, but you do share a partner. And kitchen table polyamory would encourage, even if you're not in a relationship with each other, we all want to like share space, build life together, have connections in significant ways. So that's kitchen table polyamory. Another dynamic would be parallel polyamory, in which relationships exist largely independent of partners, additional relationships, without an intentional focus on intertwining the network. Um, and some people have both. Some people have both kitchen table where they do know their other partners and they hear about that. And some people have it very separate where one partner doesn't necessarily want to be involved in the lives of the metamors or other people who are engaged. And again, the conversations, there's so many conversations kind of required in making all of this work. Um, and a word that helps us see all of this, especially when you have some people who are connected, some people who are not connected, some people who are parallel. A word that started to come up is a polycule or constellation. And we'll have an illustration in like two slides that help look at it. But if you think about a molecule and it has individual elements on it, some of those elements connect to each other and some of them don't, or a constellation. Some dots connect, some don't. This is a way of looking at the poly network, if you will, of how some people are connected and some people are not. And again, there's no one relationship structure, no one right way per se. But these are just the terms that people are using to describe, not define, but to describe the ways that they're connecting with each other and have some shorthand kind of language, even though at the end of the day, all of it's going to be a conversation.
I was going to say it's kind of cool to have terms that we can actually use. When I started, it was just like, whatever. And I've gone through several iterations of these types of things. And again, it's um, if you're going to be in something, uh, any relationship, it's fluid. You may go into it thinking, my gosh, oh yeah, we're going to have kitchen table polyamory. This is what we're setting up for. And the next thing you know, it's you have a poly family.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure that most people are. I hope that most people are familiar with chosen family, but it evolves and it morphs. And so, like you said, these are concepts and ideas. And I like that you said communication, communication, communication. It's kind of like at the beginning of this when we were opening up tonight's session, we talked about honesty and openness. That was like the very first thing in all of the groups, and that is really what it boils down to: honesty and openness, and assuming the best intent. Yeah, you hit it on the head, because you can't go into a relationship with a chip on your shoulder, and you have to understand that different people have different perspectives from different cultures, from different faith traditions, from just socioeconomic whatever, and everybody has best intent, and embrace your curiosity, and no one knows everything, right? So the things that you outlined at the beginning of this session, and you were talking about the session we're having tonight, that it actually goes well for relationships. And that was where I was going to go with that.
Cool.
Thanks.
Awesome.
I thinking about chosen family, that I was introduced to that word in the 90s, and I was introduced to it in a space that was solely a queer space. And the more time that I've spent thinking about family of choice, the more I've noticed that there's a heck of a lot of non-queer folks that are building chosen family around themselves, and that this isn't something that's unique to us. And so there's hopefully this is explicit enough. There's something that we were trying to do here, which is saying, hey, there's principles about how it is that we relate together and how we can learn from polyamory relationships that apply to all of our relationships with each other. And there are principles around what is chosen family, or what is open communication, or how are we making our needs known in explicit ways, and how are we holding the boundaries that we have need for in explicit ways that can be modeled here in these queer spaces, but also can be practiced across heteronormative spaces as well. And I think this chosen family is a really good example of that. And what you said earlier, Darren, about co-parenting. And how often do we see co-parenting because of divorce or something that separates people after the fact? But also we're seeing more and more people choose to parent with friends, or to parent with other loved ones that they're not actually ever going to be legally married to or enter into a societal contract with in that way. Um, so just an explicit noticing into this space around how these structures are actually, I think, we can learn from these in a variety of different ways. Um, that's my thought.
And again, as we continue to give words and language to describe some of this, it's so funny. I kind of assumed that we had Metamor in there, but we also didn't want to overload folks. I know for many, there's a tendency to be like, oh, why is there another letter in the alphabet? Why is there another thing? And it's not that we're like in a race to just name and describe every single existence that there is. It's more so as we look at society and as we look at our connection and access to information and community, we start to name different things and we start to have shared language so that we can have these conversations and go further than just the high level. At one point, everyone just called everyone gay. And then we started using more specific terms like queer or lesbian or bisexual or pansexual. And not everyone uses every term. I know plenty of women who use gay woman as their descriptor. But all that is to say that the when we have language to describe our experience, it helps us to find others and to communicate with others about what really works for you and what doesn't. So here are a few more terms. Anchor partner, central figure in one's life, providing stability, often used in non-hierarchical relationships as an equivalent to a primary partner without implying hierarchy. Nesting partner, This is a partner with whom one shares a home. This person may or may not be considered the primary partner, but describes a higher level of practical entanglement or engagement. Primary partner, the prioritized relationship in a hierarchical setup. And again, sometimes people will use that interchangeably with anchor partner, but these are just some words to help us talk about it. For primary partners, some have multiple primary partners, while others maintain a single primary relationship. Platonic life partner, a partner with whom one may not be romantic or sexual, but has made lifelong commitments, which may include cohabitating or co parenting. I think these are all super helpful and super useful. Um, I haven't talked too much about this, but for my relationship, which will be 4 years this month, I would call my partner an anchor partner. But we are non-monogamous. We are in an open relationship, and when we first started getting to know each other, I wasn't even looking to date anybody. But two, the conversation was just talking about how our relationship values work. And neither one of us had language for it at the time, but relationship anarchy was a perfect descriptor of what we just wanted and the frustrations we often felt in previous connections with others. Um, and when it came to this idea of an anchor partner, or the idea of like, there's some people that we really do want to do life with, but that doesn't mean that other people don't matter, or that other people are less than, or that other relationships that either one of us feels threatened by. And so, even though our relationship is long distance, um, we have a very, very high functioning relationship where we talk all the time, and we're able to co-regulate each other's emotions, and we're able to work through life choices and job changes, and even one moment that was really important for me, when he was dating someone and they had a breakup. I remember feeling sad with him about the breakup, and simultaneously feeling so much joy that I could be there with him through his breakup. Again, like, I don't have a movie to watch that has this dynamic in it. Um, but after we had talked about, and thank you for the happy anniversary. After we had talked about some of the hard stuff that he was going through and just processing some of that, I asked if he had space for a little side reflection, and he said yes. And I was like, I am really, really happy that I'm able to be with you in this. And he was like, oh my God, I didn't want to say it, but me too. We were having this shared joy of deep connection that, again, there's not been a lot of room for it in a lot of the ways that we've seen relationships portrayed. But I think about that idea of what is it not to just have joy with somebody, but to suffer with somebody, to share life's ups and downs with somebody. And over the last few years, we've been able to practice that in ways that have made all of my relationships richer. But I would definitely describe my guy as an anchor partner, as somebody who really helps me as the winds and the waves blow. But that's enough about me. What else are y'all thinking?
Thanks for sharing all that, Darren. I think that most of us can look across our lives and find folks that function in an anchoring way. And whether or not we're identifying them as partners because we've had explicit conversations in this language in this particular way, the kind of the resonance or the truth of who are our anchors or who is our anchor. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking, how would I language who these folks have been in my life? And I'm thinking and these are platonic anchors, but I'm thinking, or mixed orientation anchors. But I'm thinking that I'm sort of a serial anchorist or a serialist anchoring, whatever that would be.
Uh-huh.
I have these over time across my life, I have these people that are sort of non-blood related. Those folks exist as well for me, but these people that have emerged as anchor people, and I think in similar ways, I've been anchor people for people in moments in their lives over time. And so kind of thinking about that as I don't know if this is a real term or not. I'm making it up on the spot here. But just the idea of being in these kind of serialistic anchoring moments with people, and those moments are 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or a
Hmm.
year of something really intense, and then 5 years later, it's really intense again. And so kind of I don't know, I'm noticing for me in this moment thinking about time as a way to gain perspective on what these partner types or relationship roles mean in my own life. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Gordon, any reflections?
I was going to say that in my life, anchor partners oftentimes are people that I can come back to. And as Carrie said, we may not have spoken for quite some time, but you come back and there's that still that loving understanding, and you can just pick up a conversation where you were before. I mean, and I say anchor partner because it's more than just a friendship. It's a deeper relationship, really. I think that's and and having when we're talking about different roles of different partners and things like that, and again, some of these overlap. Exactly, you can have an anchor partner who's also a nesting partner. They're living with you and things like that. And one of the things that has really enriched my life is, to be quite honest, my primary partner. We were together 47 years until he died last year.
Mhm.
And at that time, all of our partners came into my life in various different ways to support and help me through that. And it was just such a phenomenal experience. I mean, yeah, the relationships we had prior to that and ongoing relationships were really great and in depth. But I think one of the other things that really enhanced our relationships is that the vast majority of the people that we have been involved with have at least some spiritual foundation. And whether it's Christianity or whether they are Zen Buddhist or whatever, they have that understanding of a deeper good, a higher power, and that has really enhanced the relationships. It has enhanced my spirituality because it's really interesting to talk to uh, my faith questions with a Zen Buddhist, right? So to talk about a different perspective, and they'll sit there and go, "Okay, I hear what you're saying, but have you thought about?" And so a platonic life partner, a primary partner, a nesting partner. Yeah, these are wonderful terms, but again, they're terms, and they overlap. They overlap.
So one, Gordon, thanks for sharing the passing of your partner, and um, I know that that's a tender thing, and I think when we invite others into, again, the joy and the suffering, that we become more human, we become more embodied, more enfleshed. Um, yeah, one of the illustrations, when I think about describing poly to others, is the way that God loves us, and that um, love of God isn't scarce. It's not like God loving me means there's not enough love for God to love everyone else. Um, a lot of times we see this reflected in the way we understand loving our kids, for example. where I mean, some of us have favorites, but there isn't this assumption that if you have more than one kid, you can't possibly love them all, right? And so when I think about the ways that God exists in multiple ways, if you're a Trinitarian, when I think about the ways that God's love isn't scarce, that it's abundant, um, that it even as you love others, it increases your love. Um, that for me, that kind of gives me the foundation of understanding this love and this tradition as something that is serious, as something that's significant, as something that's important. Um, to throw one more term into the mix, and I think I got this from Decolonizing Love on Instagram, but there's some partners that I describe as comets, and that is that if you think about a solar system, a comet stays with its star, with its solar system, but it has this orbit that you might not see it for 75 years. And there are people oh, God bless them. I might not see for quite some time, but just as you were saying, Gordon, that when they come back in, they're just as familiar and connected and caring as always. And even as you move through life, they're still in orbit somewhere. It may not be a normal 365 or a typical 365 or however many years it takes for Jupiter to swing around the sun, but it is consistently part of the bigger picture. Um, and so for me, when I think about how I connect with others, it actually causes me to raise the value of some of the other relationships that aren't as close, to honor them and to love them with the same love and respect that I have for any other partner. The part of our society that is maybe under scrutiny right now about what is hookup culture or what is the ways that people are maybe dating and ghosting and all these kind of things. Whether or not you hook up isn't really my point. My issue is how do we treat the people that we move in and out of our lives, and someone may be a temporary part of our lives, but I think there's an opportunity here to honor them as a whole person, that there's an opportunity to care about them, to care about their well-being and so forth. And when we get out of the shame understanding of of our non-monogamous relationships, or of anything that doesn't follow maybe what's been upheld to us as good, when we get out of the shame, it lets us better care for each other. Like if the only way we can know other people is through this lens of, well, this is bad or this is dirty or I'm not supposed to be doing this, then it does set up this disposable nature, I think, of how we care for someone. But if we stand with our full voice, or 10 toes down, as the young people are saying these days, if we stand up and really say, okay, I care about people, I'm a person who does this and does that, then we can care about their sexual health. We can care about what happens, if they lose a job or something like that. Or we can have casual connections that, okay, this may be one time, but you're still a human and I still care about you or whatever. But yeah, I really think there's just an opportunity for us to love deeper when we have a vision of love that is not scarce.
I love the fact that you said a vision of love that is not scarce, because that is truly what I try to practice, to operate out of, rather than scarcity. Oh, I can only give my love to this one person. To operate out of plenty, right? So God has given us the capacity to love many people. And why do we want to clamp that down? Why do we want to cut off other people? Because we don't see their humanity. We don't see their being. You know. Um, okay, go back to the movie Avatar. I see you, right?
Yes.
So I thought that was very poignant in the whole film because so much was said in just those few words. I see you. And when we practice that in our relationships, it expands our view of our faith. It can expand our view of other people that we come in contact with, you know. And like you said, even if you just see someone for one time, you know, if you're treating them as an actual being, as a loving, warm human being, as opposed to, just, okay, somebody that I'm going to have a good time with, and that's it. You're not objectifying them. You're actually including them in, you know. So, yeah, yeah.
The including them in feels non-extractive, right?
Hmm.
It feels, it can still be transactional without being harmful. It can still be an agreed upon, this is a one-time thing, or this is a moment and we'll see what else happens, or this is a moment and we'll never see each other again. But it doesn't have to be extractive in that way. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat around um, maybe the connections or conflicts between polyamory and Christianity. And so I'm wondering if either or both of you want to speak to that in your own lives. Where have you found resonance between polyamory and Christianity, and where have you encountered, I don't know, a dissonance in yourself or in the communities that you're in? How does that show up for both of you?
To me, it's very similar to reconciling my sexuality, I, my being with faith. That was a huge struggle I had coming out in the late '60s, early '70s. Yeah, I'm that old. Sorry about that. Um, and at that time, it was pre-Stonewall even, and so reconciling that with my faith. Well, if God is open enough to reconcile our being queer and the multitude of relationships that there are in 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 people all over the world. Um, there was another quote I had here from. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're all good. You got a
Yeah.
printed multi-sheet. I love it. You're ready.
In current society, only 43 of 238 societies across the world are monogamous. And I realized that it seems that, wow, everybody is monogamous, but it isn't. And it's a Western viewpoint that was influenced by the Roman Empire and Greek philosophy and all of that. And in nature, wow, we aren't even going to start that because there are so many creatures in nature that are not necessarily monogamous. There are some, like the sandhill cranes, that I don't know if you heard them in the background. They were screaming here a few minutes ago. That's what I call
Someone
it.
took them out.
So, but sandhill cranes mate for life, but very few creatures actually do. They'll
Mhm.
mate and then they'll go on to another mate. And so that's all part of God's creation and God's plan. I don't know what God's plan is, but
Yeah.
there's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I love that diversity of creation kind of perspective. That I heard somebody's scientific kind of anthropological research that said humans have just for the most from the fossil record and so forth, from what we can tell, humans are about 50 monogamous versus non-monogamous. And that works for me. And when it comes to how we look at this through a theological lens, there is so much good stuff happening in the chat right now. Um, I love, I'm loving how it's so important for us to make sure that we have an awareness of our grounding of scripture being in a historical, cultural lens, right? um, because there are lots of cultures that were both present in the times that are recorded in Scripture, as well as after. And the values of the church have not been universal. There was a time where celibacy and singleness were the highest order of how to live as a good Christian according to the church. And then somebody said different, and we saw he was actually considered a heretic at first when he said no, it should be marriage first. But no, actually, he said it should be equal. Marriage should be equal with celibacy, and that was considered a heretical statement. And I'm horrible with names and dates, so Google it; it'll pop up. But there's been a range of how the church and how our church traditions have looked at this. There's been a range of how societies have looked at these things. And so knowing that lots of our current values come from Greco-Roman histories, and that filters into lots of things. And part of that value was ownership, that so many pieces of what we call marriage, even our modern marriage traditions today, were about proving purity, proving ownership, about the exchanging of financial or material wealth. Like, these are where we get a lot of the things that we've kind of elevated into spiritual traditions and representations, but they don't come from the Bible. They came from some dudes in Rome who were trying to, protect their wealth and their legacies and so forth. Um, and so in all of that, it does bring me back to this idea that we do see multiple relationship styles in the Bible. We haven't named and we haven't talked about polygamy and I can't think of there's another term or two in there that are practiced, especially in some non-Western countries like Africa, South America, Asia, and so forth. Um, but there are lots of ways that people have been living faithfully, or that people have been living in resonance with their own traditions, while still receiving the gospel or still being connected to their faith. Where we have difficulty accepting or engaging with that typically comes from the filters that we've inherited from our own cultural lens. And so it's fine for it to feel uncomfortable. But again, that's where the curiosity is. Let's look back. I spent almost 20 years as a wedding photographer, and then currently I still do wedding officiating. And for so many couples, when they start researching for the first time where the wedding traditions came from, where the garter toss and the veil, and they're like, "Oh, this is all horrible. Why would we do this in our wedding?" Right? Um, and so all of that is to say, I think we're in a really beautiful opportunity to continue what God has always been doing, which is showing up with us messy humans and figuring it out. David clearly was beloved and called a man after God's own heart, and he's had some issues with his sex and sexuality, and he still ultimately is recorded as being somebody who was beloved by God. Same for Solomon. Solomon certainly was not a monogamous individual. Not saying he's an example or an ideal, but I am saying that God has worked in, through, and around all kinds of people, and that we have an opportunity to continue that tradition of God saying, "Okay, let's go. I'm here with you. I am. We are going to figure this out together." Um, there's a really good and I'm wondering if Carrie wants to chime in on this. There's some really good conversations specifically about patriarchy, specifically about why our society sometimes doesn't want to embrace some of these more collective values. Carrie, am I putting you on the spot? Do you feel like chiming in on that?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. I'm also I'm following the chat, and there's a good question there about uh, the health concerns for folks who are assigned female at birth when they're in non-monogamous relationships. So I just want to kind of ping that question and maybe broaden on it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So I think I want to bring us back to the kind of early definition, and the first couple of slides where what we're talking about here in this space is consensual non-monogamy. So we're talking about something that is based in open conversation, in honoring the partners, in explicit and revisited conversation as people continue to move and grow and be in relationship together. Um, Often we see across history when we're looking at relationships that are non-consensual but are still multiple partnered, often that's the kind of hierarchy where it's not about who's prioritized, but it's about who is in charge of another, right? So we're talking about hierarchy that is abusive in some way or not really thinking about the needs of every person involved. And so thinking about this, there's a question here about non-monogamy and health issues around autoimmunity in folks who are assigned female at birth. I think that what's important in relationships that are consensual um, is the explicit and open conversation around sharing fluids, around protection, around STIs, around the kinds of relationships that any of the partners are interested in engaging in when we're talking about sexual behaviors, or when you're talking about emotional behaviors, or when you're talking about shared resources like who has access to whose funds, who has access to whose
Mhm.
homes, like all of these different pieces, where in cultures that are not monogamous, there are relationships like what we're talking about in the minority, and then there are relationships that kind of privilege one or more people in typically financially, and then all of the trickle down effect, where if one person is prioritized financially, typically that's going to be a male identified person, and everyone else who's engaged with that person is then property in some way. So we're talking about abusive or extractive um, uh, models that are based in the patriarchy or are based in some kind of extractive system, whether or not it's capitalist. And so those are ways that we see harm being done inside models and structures where there could actually be something like what we're saying here is could be consensual and based in love and shared in an experience of wholeness and fullness, and not an experience of scarcity. So earlier, Darren kind of in passing said, in Greek and Roman cultures, you're still considered monogamous if you're tied to one person, whether or not you go sleep with one of your slaves or one of your servants, right? We're not talking about that dynamic. We're not talking about a power dynamic that can be extractive or abusive. What we're saying is what we see as inside Christianity, or as upholding biblical values, the idea that relationship orientation can be varied and diverse. And here are some expressions of that that are based in consent and love. Um, and I'm looking at the time and thinking we should probably do the last couple of slides and then maybe take one or two more questions, or maybe the slides kind of finish us out towards the end of the session.
Okay, I can pop the slides up, and then I also wanted to speak a little bit more into the health risks concern because it is. I think it's so important doing two things at once. I think it's so important that we do have more and more open conversations about both our health and about what our risks are. As somebody who does education uh, from a sex positive place. That is a place where I'm encouraging people to make the best choices for them, whether that's celibacy, whether that's monogamy, whether that's being in very casual situations, and how do we reduce harm all across the board. I think there's something for everyone. And we should be able to talk about that. So, when it comes to this, I've seen for some people, sex, period, is a health concern. Just the fact that if they have sex, their bodies and the ways that their bodies respond to anyone is going to be harmful for them. So for them, being non-monogamous with their partner means that their partner is cared for in their sexual needs in ways that are outside of their relationship, and as a again from an ethical perspective, that they're protecting their health by not engaging with their partner. Statistics wise, it's been found that people who are non-monogamous tend to have more frequent health visits, checkups, and so forth. So they tend to be more on top of their sexual health, and more knowledgeable about their sexual health. Again, this is not an all or nothing. This is not an everyone kind of situation, but we see that because when people are more open about the kind of engagements that they're having, when they're a lot more free to discuss what works for them and what doesn't, that people tend to make or align themselves with better choices when it comes to their health. Um, for 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 everyone, the best choice that you can make is the one that's right for you, for your body, for the risks that you're willing to take. Sex with anyone comes with some level of risk, and so if you are choosing to be sexually active at all with anyone, then we are then from there we choose what risks work for us and what risks don't. So as always, consult with your primary care physician, do your research, and we as a community just want to support you in whatever works for you. And so I really appreciate the conversations that are going in the chat. And we're going to try to honor this time and get. I'm just going to show briefly, because we've covered a lot of this, but this just kind of illustrates some of the different connecting styles that exist, from dyads where it's just two, triads where three people are all connected to each other. Our most recent conference in January, one of our worship leaders shared that they're in a closed triad, and again, there's all kinds of ways that people are existing on this spectrum. A V that might be considered parallel polyamory, where two people, um, where a person has two different partners, but the partners aren't connected. They're metamors. They're not necessarily connected to each other. And the polycule illustration of different people, different connections. Some are together, some are not. And again, all these are just ways to help us visualize, to think about the connections that we have. Like I said, in my own experience, my polycule, my constellation, isn't fixed, but it does also include people who are platonic. It does also include family. It does also include friends. It is something about how am I supported and cared for and loved. And I treat all of those as a part of the same plane, if you will. And so for me, understanding that, and people who can understand that, there's some folks who really want somebody who's going to like choose them over everyone else. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. If that's what your love language is, go for it. Um, and there's some people who hold a much more egalitarian view, and that works for them. That makes them feel loved. So, uh, those are some pieces. And then I think this last slide helps us to kind of round this out nicely. Carrie, you wanna take us home with this one?
Sure. Common misconceptions about polyamory. So one, it's all about sex. Well, okay, so it's not. It can be if you're with a group of people who are all about sex, but most of us are not actually all about sex in every part of our life all the time, all day long, uh, even if we're sexual people and engaging in sexual behaviors. And so polyamory, just like the rest of our lives, is not all about sex. Commitment issues. So the idea that polyamory is just another modern code word for sleeping around or cheating or something like this. As Gordon shared, he was with his primary for decades. So polyamorous people can absolutely have deep and lasting commitments, and also folks break up with each other, and that's common as well. But we see that with monogamous marriage. Um, so commitment issues are not more or less common inside polyamory as they are in any other form of relationship. And they're not inherently unstable. So they are just as stable and long lasting as other relationships. And possibly more so because of the focus in this kind, in consensual non-monogamous spaces or consensual polyamory, because of the communication and the boundaries, those relationships are it's sometimes more open and honest and trust built spaces than traditional monogamous relationships.
The understanding about communication and being open and honest in any relationship and working on understanding each other's needs and personal boundaries. It's no two people are alike. No two people, even if they've been living together for 20 years, understand everything about each other. They may finish each other's sentences, but that doesn't mean that they understand things. And this is something that polyamory can actually, folks who are non-polyamorous can gain some understanding in their own relationships, not just about polyamorous people, but in their own relationships. And so I love the down here it says understanding polyamory challenges us to examine relationship expectations. And indeed, these insights benefit everyone, regardless of relationship style preference, because whether you're going to be non-monogamous your whole life, whether you're going to be monogamous your whole life, these concepts that have been brought to the forefront because of the difficult questions and because of the need for open and honest communication helps everyone in every relationship.